No one is discussing the enormous exodus that is taking place. People who are the most alert, aware, and psychologically mature are subtly removing themselves from society. Not dramatically, not fiercely. They are just going missing, vanishing from social media, quitting their jobs, breaking up with people, and preferring to live alone rather than interact with others. Carl Jung foresaw this. Necessary withdrawal, he said, when a person's psychological awareness reaches a point where engaging in collective unconsciousness causes them physical pain, not metaphorical suffering, but somatic psychological anguish. I'm going to explain why Jung thought that waking people wouldn't simply disappear. It is necessary. Why? The more aware you get, the less you can put up with everyday life. And why this isn't escapism or spiritual avoidance. It is the psyche's way of surviving in an environment where most people are asleep. You're not antisocial, according to Jung. If you've been feeling the want to retreat, to vanish, to leave everything behind, you're growing too aware for the group container. This is what Jung realized, and it clarifies everything. Collective unconsciousness is the foundation of society. Mass projections, collective delusions, and mutually accepted shadows. These aren't system errors. The system is them, and it only functions if everyone engages in unconscious participation. A person becomes a glitch in the matrix the instant they truly awaken, not just intellectually, but also psychologically. Everyone else's projections are visible to them. They are aware of the shadows that everyone is trying to avoid. They are aware of the unconscious games that everyone is playing. You can't unsee it after you've seen it. Jung had first-hand experience with this. Normal social interaction became more and more intolerable to him as his consciousness grew. He was awake in a room full of people chattering in their sleep, not because he was conceited. He had to act as though he didn't see what he saw, didn't know what he knew, and didn't comprehend what was actually going on behind every conversation. The curse of consciousness is this. Despite being physically surrounded, you experience psychological isolation. You are functioning from a separate world, perceiving different dimensions, and speaking a different language. Additionally, it becomes exhausting to put in the effort necessary to continuously translate between your consciousness and the communal unconsciousness. Therefore, the awakened begin to vanish because they must violate their consciousness in order to remain in society, not because they despise it. They pretend to be asleep in order to meet daily demands. They must dim their brightness after every engagement. They are expected to be less than who they have become in every relationship. Eventually, enough is said by the mind. Pull out. Keep your mind intact. Stop allowing what you've worked so hard to build to be drained by the collective unconscious. Jung found that when you integrate your personal shadow, it becomes impossible to see the communal shadow. You're witnessing a whole culture deny the existence of its darkness while projecting it. It hurts to see other people project their evil onto scapegoats after you've confronted your own. The other political party is evil after you've embraced your own darkness and seen the shadow projections of society. The issue is that group. What's wrong with those folks? Because that's just what it is. It seems like seeing a mass psychosis. This is what Jung referred to as the weight of seeing. The enlightened individual recognizes that the majority of social disputes are only reflections of shadows. Conflicts are the clashing of collective shadows. Political divides are projections of the masses. Targets are being sought by collective shadow material on social media. It is impossible to participate once you realize this. When you observe a mob stalking its own shadow, you can't join them. When you realize both sides are projecting, you can't choose one. When you acknowledge that it is communal unconsciousness, you cannot participate in collective blame. Therefore, you withdraw out of psychological necessity rather than supremacy. It was precisely described by one of Jung's students. In the past, I had strong political beliefs. After that, I realized that my opinions were really projections after integrating my shadow. I now witness two groups of people angrily projecting their unconscious stuff at one another during political disputes under the guise of justice or truth. I am no longer able to take part. Joining a mass hallucination would be the equivalent. But this is what's actually taking place. The collective shadow is felt by the awakened, not just seen. You become sensitive to energy when you become conscious. It seems like psychological violence to be in the presence of unconscious shadow projection. It isn't a judgment. It is a true incompatibility of energies. This was something Jung observed in his own life. He found crowds nearly intolerable after individuation. He felt the unconscious material spinning, the projections, repressions, and shadows creating a psychological storm that only he seemed to be aware of, not because he didn't like people. For this reason, the first people to vanish from social media are awakened. It's a contraption that projects shadows around the clock. Each scroll is a barrage of unconscious content. Each comment section is a boxing ring with shadows. It's like being made to watch. Individuals strike themselves while blaming others for the bruises for someone who has integrated their shadow. Jung's second realization: it is impossible to act your persona once you have individuated toward your true self, and society expects you to perform your persona. You could engage in the social games without realizing it. When prompted, smile. Make the appropriate statements. Fulfill your role. That greater reality, however, transcends all masks once you've connected with your true self. Returning to persona performance is like dying on a psychic level. Performance is required in every social setting. The social media persona, the role in the family, the professional persona, the suitable feelings, and the permissible viewpoints. This feels normal to someone who is still identified with their persona. When someone has discovered who they are, it feels like suffocation. Jung learned this from own experience. He was no longer able to act like a Swiss psychiatrist after his encounter with the unconscious. He saw through the opinions of the group and could not pretend to agree with them. Relationships that required him to be dishonest were too difficult for him to sustain. In order to be truly himself, he withdrew to Bowlingen, his tower by the lake. The behavior is not antisocial. It supports authenticity. The awakened individual rejects society out of incompatibility rather than anger. They are now too authentic for settings that need performance, too real for settings that demand fakeness, and too complete for containers that can only hold fragments. The impossibility was explained by one of Jung's patients, a successful executive who had undergone individuation. When I attend board meetings, I observe that everyone is carrying out their executive responsibilities expressing and thinking as executives should. I am no longer able to do it. I feel like I'm being asked to act like someone I'm not. In that room, my true self is silent. My persona alone did, and it's no longer alive. She didn't give up abruptly. Over the course of several months, she quietly vanished and relocated to a small town where she could be authentic rather than successful, from the accomplishment of discovering herself, not from failure. This is occurring all over the place. Careers that need persona presentation are being abandoned by the awakened, leaving social circles that require masks and breaking off ties based on fake selves. They're not a social failure. Their authenticity is working. Additionally, that achievement precludes involvement in society. This is what Jung's energy understanding was. It takes a lot of psychological energy to stay conscious in an unconscious setting, and awakened people are beginning to realize that this is not sustainable. Consider what a conscious person would have to do in a typical society. Continue to weed out unintentional projections. Keep your distance from energy-draining people. Convert between surface and depth. Maintain their frequency while surrounded by static, allowing everyone else to leak their unconscious material in addition to their own. This was dubbed psychological labor by Jung. Conscious people perform unseen labor simply to be in unconscious environments. It's draining. In order to preserve harmony, you must avoid responding to projections, absorbing the unconscious material of others, becoming entangled in group dramas, matching the unconscious frequency of those around you, and betraying your truth in every interaction. For those who are unconscious, this is ineffective. They are following the current of the group. It's like swimming upstream in a tsunami of unconsciousness for conscious people. You must eventually exit the water or perish. Jung observed that the weariness of sustaining consciousness in unconscious environments, rather than personal pathology, was the cause of his most conscious patients' chronic fatigue, unexplained illnesses, and depression. The cure wasn't therapy. It was withdrawal from the environments draining them. One woman, a teacher who'd awakened through years of inner training, had terrible chronic weariness. Medical tests found nothing abnormal. Through analysis with Jung, she recognized she was investing huge energy preserving her consciousness while surrounded by unconscious co-workers and students all day. She wasn't sick. She was energetically depleted when she stopped teaching and relocated to a cabin in nature. Her energy returned after weeks, not from rest, but from no longer needing to sustain consciousness against the continual pressure of collective slumber. This is why awakened people go to nature, to solitude, to small conscious groups, not to avoid responsibility, but to maintain the consciousness they have fought so hard to develop. They recognize that consciousness is precious and finite, and spending it on unconscious interactions is like pouring water into sand. The Jung defined this withdrawal as archetypal, the hermit phase that every individuating person must experience, not permanently, but unavoidably. The psyche requires isolation to integrate what society would fragment. The hermit stereotype isn't about misanthropy. It's about psychological necessity. When you're altering at a fundamental level, you need space from forces that would drag you back to previous patterns. You need silence to hear your inner voice. You need isolation to assimilate without disturbance. Jung himself experienced periods of intense seclusion. His time in Bollingen wasn't a holiday. They were necessary for the mind. In order to cultivate individual consciousness, he needs separation from mass consciousness. To comprehend his own depths, he required a break from other people's projections. This is the current state of awakened individuals. They're not vanishing because they're antisocial or weak. They are adhering to the archetypal pattern that is necessary for individuation. When the shadow integrates without social pressure to suppress it, it is known as the hermit phase. Without persona expectations, the self manifests itself. When there is no external noise, inner insight grows. The process of psychological metamorphosis is uninterrupted. However, this is what Jung highlighted. There is no escape from the hermit period. It's getting ready. The enlightened individual withdraws to create something that society needs, not to leave it. They are becoming what Jung referred to as aquarium fish by assimilating truth and gesturing wisdom. Creatures that have adapted to depths that are inaccessible to others. A philosopher who was one of Jung's analyans vanished from academia for 3 years. Everyone believed he had lost it. He had made progress. Without his scholarly character, he would not have been able to incorporate discoveries that he did in solitude. He returned with revolutionary ideas, but they could only come to fruition when he withdrew from the system that they would finally change. Although it appears to be vanishing, the hermit phase is actually deepening. The individual who has been awakened is not fleeing. They are delving farther than society permits. They are putting in the labor that can only be done alone, cultivating the consciousness that, once fully developed, may eventually benefit the whole. Jung's last realization gives hope. The disappeared are never truly gone. However, they return in a different way, to impart consciousness to those who are prepared for it, not to partake in unconsciousness. Following the hero's adventure, the awakened vanish, retreat, change, and then reappear with gifts. Normal society isn't the return, though. It's to the periphery, the boundaries, the areas where consciousness can exist unhindered. They become into what Jung referred to as boundary dwellers, available but unabsorbed, present but not involved. They may come back as artists working from real depths, healers assisting people who are prepared to awaken, teachers sharing with small groups of seekers, authors providing guidelines for those starting to withdraw, and maps for other vanishing souls. However, they never make a comeback to the mainstream. They are unable to. You cannot de-individuate after you have individuated. You can't pretend to be unconscious once you're cognizant. You can't survive on a persona once you've discovered who you are. Jung noticed this pattern over and over. Seldom did his totally individuated patients go back to their former lives. They made new ones that were quieter, simpler, and more genuine. They managed to make a difference without compromising their morals. They discovered how to contribute without getting eaten. One patient, a therapist who had been absent for 2 years, came back to work with a small group of people experiencing spiritual emergencies rather than returning to standard practice. She was limited to working with people going through what she had gone through. She was no longer able to provide general therapy. She had a small yet significant practice. She was a lifeline to those who were awakening, but she was unseen to the majority. The model is this: awakened individuals are vanishing from the general population but resurfacing in pockets of consciousness, constructing alternatives, parallel systems, and providing depth to those that want it, while staying undetectable to others. According to Jung, this was evolution at work. Not everyone wakes up at the same time. The trailblazers vanish first, make room for others, and then serve as lights for the following generation. In reality, what appears to be abandonment is architecture, constructing the frameworks that, when the time is right, will facilitate the communal awakening. Allow me to summarize Jung's entire explanation for the disappearance of spiritually aware individuals. The collective gloom cast by unconscious society is intolerable to them now. They are unable to act like the person society expects them to be. In unconscious areas, the energy needed to sustain consciousness becomes unsustainable. They go through the required hermit phase of individuation. Eventually, they come back, but only to the periphery of consciousness rather than the unconscious core. Failure is not what this vanishing is. Evolution is what it is. Wisdom, not weakness. Not desertion, but the quintessential need. The pattern being followed by the awakened is as old as consciousness itself. Withdraw, change, come back, change. This is perceived by society as betrayal, loss, and abandonment. Where had everyone who was conscious gone? Why are the most knowledgeable voices becoming less audible? When the collective is most in need, why are the enlightened leaving it? However, according to Jung, they are not leaving the collective. They're getting ready for it. They are creating something that the collective consciousness is not yet prepared for through their disengagement. By vanishing, they are making room for others to do the same. They are gesturing words that the collective cannot yet hear in their quiet. Jung would want you to understand that if you're experiencing the want to vanish, this isn't escapism or spiritual bypassing. It's a psychological requirement. You have evolved to the point where you can no longer engage with collective unconsciousness without betraying yourself. Your feelings of withdrawal are not antisocial. It is exemplary. You're not running away from civilization. You're walking the path of the hermit, which is required of all individuating people. Being unable to put up with unconsciousness is not a sign of weakness. You are awake, and awakeness need different conditions than sleep. Allow yourself to vanish, even only temporarily. Whether it's mental or physical distance, find your bowling inning. Give up wasting your energy on unintentional interactions. Give up performing for unobservable crowds. Put an end to converting your depth into superficial phrases. It's not selfish of you to vanish. It's essential. People who have fully individuated are more needed by the community than those who only engage in part. It requires consciousness over compliance, sincerity over performance, and depth over surface. And you will bring gifts that could only be produced in disappearance when you return. If you return at all, you will preserve a false sense of belonging while offering what cannot be offered. Speaking acceptance will allow you to express facts that were previously unspoken. The spiritually enlightened are vanishing because awakening necessitates their disappearance, inevitably, but not forever. From love, not from hate. Love for authenticity, truth, and consciousness. Love that says, I must become whole, even if that means being alone. Jung would advise, disappear consciously, withdraw with purpose. Use your hermit phase for integration, not isolation. And remember, your disappearance is preparing something. You're not leaving the collective. You're pioneering where it will eventually need to go. If you're feeling the need to withdraw or are disappearing, subscribe to this channel, where I explore Jung's insights for those walking the individuation path. Remember, your withdrawal isn't a sign of abandonment. It's a step in evolution. What the collective truly needs are awakened individuals, not those merely fitting in.